So how was your day so far? It's
Yeah, so far pretty busy for me, but got an hour for my lunch, so let's record a video.
all right. Let's record a video.
3、2、1。
So I'm really excited to have you here. Maybe you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. So I'm Derek Rawlings, or DM Rawlings in the community. I started off season 1 through 4 doing statistics for the Rocket League Championship Series. It's a role that's now taken over by Slock. But during that time, I worked very closely during League Ops to make sure that all of the overlays and statistics were prepared, as well as write some content for the RLCS webpage at the time. Since then, I've kind of moved more behind the scenes. I do a few things like fantasy here, and generally try to stay relevant in the Rocket League community.
That sounds really interesting. So right now you are basically the stats keeper behind Rocket League Fantasy.
Yeah, so there's a few things that I do for fantasy. The first off is any of the player salaries. I've written the data model for, so how we derive those statistics, as well as coordinating with some of the power rankers and tournament seeders to apply a bit of a custom touch where we think some teams are going to be better. I like using a data-driven model, but very often with players transferring from one team to another, it can be difficult to assess exactly how good a player is. So we have a bit of a manual touch in there based on the general prevailing theories of people at the time. So I do that. I also handle marketing and promotion for fantasy, any kind of online support that may be required for it, and generally just do my best to manage the project and push fantasy on as many people as possible.
Yeah, and you also manage or handle the community members that have their own leagues, right? From what I
Yeah,
heard.
so we recently added the capacity for verified leagues. So we've handed that out to, say, Athena and Johnny Boy and a few other people in the community who are established sources, so that when you see a league by them, you know that it's by them, and coordinating all of that, helping them kind of maximize their league size and get their promotional material out. Like Johnny Boy had a video, you should go watch it, it's great.
With you putting all this effort in, it came so far that it's now the biggest fantasy league ever, correct?
Yeah, we had over 10,000 people sign up, and I think once we removed teams that didn't have full rosters, we're still around that, uh, was it 7,000, 8,000 range? So, really blown away by things this year. We had a goal of 10,000 going in, and I'm very happy that we've realized it. And I think that what really made the difference this time is we had all of the teams available for Oceania as well as North America and Europe in advance. So we had an extra week to promote it and get the message out. And we also have a lot of plans for the future that I think are going to help grow the league as well.
Maybe you can explain some of these plans, or is that still a secret?
We haven't made any hard decisions yet, but we've been talking about making changes specifically to the head-to-head league to make it a little bit more engaging on a week-to-week basis. Looking at the possibility of maybe having different league picks locked into different leagues. So if you're in 3 different leagues, then maybe you have 3 different rosters. A lot of questions about how that would all fit together, but ultimately what we want to do is we want to give people as many different ways to play as possible, so that if they're in a very small group, maybe they do a draft with their friends, or if it's a larger group of people, then you've got options there as well that keep you engaged for the entire season.
That sounds like a bit of developing work as well. Are you also developing, or are you just on the statistical side?
So technically, I've got code access, but I'm not a full-on web developer. I know my CSS and HTML, but uh, uh, I need to get a little bit more up to speed before I start making any kind of touches. We've got a dedicated team of 2 that are working on the background, one who's more front-end design oriented, and the other one who is running our back end. Raymond Perez, who just took over for Quest Ferret this year's doing our back end, and then we have Lourdes, who's handling all of our front end development.
So it's just the three of you, or is there any more people involved?
It's basically just three of us with some additional touches here and there from people as we need them, but a pretty small operation.
Really cool. I'm really impressed. Like, I've been playing this fantasy league for a few years now, I think. I'm not really sure how many years, but I did it a couple of times, and I still can't like figure out how to perform good. Like this weekend was horrible for me. I like placed 5,000 or something. How did your team do? Do you have a team?
I do have a team, and it is, I think, 1064th last time I checked, once all the SAM players got in. So, I'm top 15%, which I guess isn't that bad. My problem with making fantasy picks is I've got my favorites, and it's really hard to deviate off of them. So, even if there might be picks that have a better value, I still believe that some players are going to realize their potential when maybe in week 1 or 2 they're not quite there yet.
Yeah, I had some like outside factors coming in where I think like I picked speed and he had like internet issues because he was on vacation. Some factors that I couldn't add to my calculation beforehand. So yeah, I was kind of disappointed. But I made a league, and one of the members that was in my league, he's actually top 100, and he made like 3,800 something points this first week, which is pretty good.
That's outstanding.
Yeah, really, really good. So you keep some further, like some more detailed statistics apart from just the salary and the points, right?
Yeah, the one that I especially keep track of is a statistic that is points per salary. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at the value of the player, and then what I'm doing is comparing that against the output that they had. So if you're a cheaper player and you got a good number of points, you might actually be a better value pick compared to a player with a higher salary who made slightly more points than the other one. And I find that that's really useful because you can't just pick the best players on your roster, right? You've got to find a few diamonds in the rough that are going to overperform for you, and that points per salary is really where that comes from.
So this could maybe make up like a weekly team of the week, something
Yeah,
like
you could
if you have.
definitely look at something like that where you go, okay, well, who was the most efficient players this week that you could afford for a $10,000 salary? Now, keep in mind you can only do 2 transfers per week, so you wouldn't necessarily be able to jump and pick these teams all the time, but it's very worthwhile.
Actually, sometimes it's better to not just look at the salary and or not look at the average points made, but also at the points per salary. So you get a value pick that's pretty cheap.
Yeah, and there were some really good value picks in the first. A lot being probably the biggest surprise of all. He wasn't necessarily first overall in the number of points that he got, but for his 1250 salary, he clocked in the highest at 0.566 points per salary. So he was absolutely at the bottom of the table in terms of selecting players, and he really performed well here for the opening week. As to whether or not he's going to be able to keep that up throughout the season, who knows? It looks like he's got something to prove.
Yeah, I mean,
another one who. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's also, I noticed him on the bottom of the list there with maybe Tadpole. I think was also in the same, if I remember correctly, in the same price value. But yeah, then what I saw was that Math was just insane on average points.
Yeah, he's one of the South American players. It's a Rhodium that he plays on. They had a matchup this week where they were playing one of the lower table South American teams, and they won each of their games by 3 or more goals each. And Math was the real one that profited there. He had the largest week in fantasy history, as far as I can tell.
The stats were just so impressive.
I think he had definitely 2 hat tricks, possibly even a third. With several assists as well, which put him very clearly at the top of the table, but only third in terms of points per salary, because he was one of the more expensive players. In working with the South American tournament organizers, he was identified as definitely one of the top 5 players in SAM to pay attention to.
That's also what people might be wondering. Where do the values of the salaries come from? They come from like collected statistics, and you then estimate the value of each player?
Yeah, so I can break it down. I've used a number of indicators this year, more than I've ever used before. I'm looking at the last 2 seasons that they've played, either at an RLRS or RLCS level. Then what I've done is I've looked at, based on their stats in the previous season, the number of score, goals, assists, what would I project their average week to be like? And use that as one of the indicators. The other thing that I'll do if I've got them is I'll look at previous fantasy performance. So, how many points did they get on average per week last season, as well as this season? I factored in best results because what I find is there are some players that are out there that are very good at taking advantage of weaker teams. So you will see them in certain weeks just jump way higher than other players. So I wanted to factor that in as well, because at the end of the day, you're able to hand select a player for a given week. And if you know that a good player is going up against a weaker team, maybe there's an added, like they're really going to do well that week. So I wanted to incorporate that somehow into the salary of a player. So then once I've got that, I figure out who the best projected player is going to be, and they are given a value, and then everybody else's salary is kind of balanced around that one person's salary.
Oh, okay.
So the best player around, with information that I did have, was a combination of Express and CJ, who were valued at the 2050, and then everybody else going down that list is just relative to that. So Coxier almost as good as them at 2025, all the way down to the bottom, where if you look at a lot of statistics last season, they didn't really impress. So that's why he's at the bottom this time.
And I've also noticed that I think the players from your calculation and the estimation of the value are closer together than they were last season. I noticed that there were some players like in the 900 even, or like below 1,000 salary in the last season, right?
Yeah, so there's two factors going into that. I think you're right. I think that there's the quality of the lowest caliber RLCS player this season is higher than it's ever been. So that's kind of bringing everything towards the middle in that regard. And I think the superstars as well are maybe just not as much of a superstar as they used to be. So you look at the Garretts of the world and heavy point getters. Aside from math, there may be no Drippe this season out in OCE. But the other factor there as well is that we took away the bench player this season. And that means that everyone's salaries went up proportionally because now $10,000 is being split between 6 players when it used to be 7. Yeah, and obviously the reason for removing that bench player, it's the same thing that I did on my fantasy, is I grabbed the cheapest player that I could and stuck them on the bench, and that gave me more salary for the remaining 6. And then I never had to use that player that I had on the bench because I was smart with my transfers.
I see.
So as a result of that, we just thought that that wasn't fair and not according to the spirit of what we wanted to do. We didn't want someone riding the bind the entire season. So instead, we just took it out, and hopefully that's forcing people to make more difficult decisions with their team compositions.
So based on last week's stats, can you maybe propose a good trade or a trade that you, or a player that you would trade away? Is there something that you can propose, like assuming that they perform the same way when they play again?
It's difficult to say. I do think that matchups are very important to look at when you're doing these kinds of things. I know there was a thread on the subreddit that talked about how insanely cheap all of the Savage folks are now, Barcelona. And looking at their week 1 results, they didn't exactly do the best. Now, that may have been because they were facing Dignitas, and Dignitas just doesn't allow anyone to do anything. But I would think twice about Barcelona until they can prove that their output is going to be where it should be for their salaries. Aside from that, I know that there were a number of people who selected Rizzo in their fantasy pools.
Me, for example.
Yeah.
I actually picked him. He made some 450 points, I think.
Yeah, he had 495. He's in the middle of the pack, so he's maybe a bad example. Let me just kind of go down here and take a little bit more. So, uh, Squishy Muffins is in the probably bottom 25% in terms of points per salary. I don't think that C9 had the week that they wanted to have. I do expect that they're going to bounce back.
Okay, so you would say, even though Squishy Muffin didn't perform good and has a high salary, you'd probably say it's a keeper, like from your personal point of view?
Yeah, I feel like you don't want to be too reactive when it comes to fantasy. When in the first week, players aren't necessarily up to that game form that you would expect them to be later in the season. Which is why whenever I have conversations with colleagues about who's going to be number one at the end of the season, very often for me it comes down to, are some of these teams who picked up new players playing against other top teams in week one, or is it going to be week five? Because in week five they're going to be more gelled as a team, and I'm expecting them to perform better. Whereas in week one, I think they're still kind of feeling things out, and they haven't quite played at that highest level yet together. So I expect some stumbles.
Yeah, and also for them, even though they are pros, I mean, or even though they're established pros, there's something about being live and knowing that it's week play now, and they have to get into that feel and into the rhythm as well. I agree.
Yeah, I feel like you can scrim as much as you want to, but until you're in a live environment, got 50,000 people watching, that the experience isn't quite the same.
Yeah, I agree. So what I've noticed is that there's a new player that was added recently, and he has the highest salary, and he's the only one on his team. So I think the salary is 3,100, and the name of the player is Turtle. What's up with that?
Yeah, so Turtle's an interesting case. Turtle joined a lobby and thus earned points in a game on record. And therefore, as a professional organization, we thought that it was critical that we update the players table to reflect all players that have participated in RLCS events this season.
So for everyone who didn't watch the stream on the weekend, Turtle was actually casting some of the games, and he accidentally clicked the auto join button instead of spectating, and that caused a little bit of technical delay. So the joke is on point here. I love it. I was laughing so much when I saw it, especially the team name was hilarious. Yeah, do you recommend him as a top pick for the next week?
He's a very expensive player, and I'm legitimately not certain whether or not he's going to be around for the remainder of the season. I would say if you can afford him, that he could make or break your fantasy league.
Make or break. I love it. I have two questions left, and they are not really related to fantasy. First question is, are you going to New Jersey in June?
I want to go. I've got family out in the New York area, so it would make a lot of sense for me to go out there and see them. But at the same time, organizing trips, I'm still deciding whether or not I can make it all work with the financing and whatnot. I'm in Vancouver, so there's also the border crossing and all that needs to be accounted for. So the answer is I'm still not sure yet, but I am extremely excited about the venue. I'm excited for the location. I'm so glad that it's coming back to the East Coast in a population center like the greater New York area. And I think that it's going to be a phenomenal success. And one way or another, seeing all of those teams play in the Prudential Center is going to be an absolute joy. So I'd recommend it to anyone.
Yeah, I'm still debating as well. As you know, I'm from Germany and living in Berlin at the moment, and it's even a longer trip for me. But I mean, I've never been to a major event, and every time I'm telling myself I'm going. And last time it was in Vegas, and I was like, can I afford it? So I'm still debating. But I mean, maybe we can, if we both decide to go, maybe we can meet up.
Yeah, definitely. One of my favorite parts about going to these tournaments is, I mean, the matches are great, and it's great to see someone crowned a champion. But I know so many people in this community, and just being able to give them a hug or a high five is the best feeling of all.
I mean, that's basically the only reason I want to go. Like, I can watch the stream and get the info on the games and the results, but like meeting all the people from that I know in the community, like basically right now I'm just an internet community member, and seeing them in real life like I think it means a lot to me. So I'm still torn apart if I want to make that investment or if I can afford it. So my second question. So, have you heard about the new Rocket Pass, and did you see that?
I have heard about the new Rocket Pass. I saw the announcement. We're going to be having some challenges, encouraging people to try out some different things, which I think is going to be great. I didn't get the full details, but I am hoping that it's going to encourage playing some of the playlists that people wouldn't normally gravitate to. When it does come to the Rocket Pass itself, though, I really cared about stuff in Rocket League for maybe the first couple of years where we started getting this flow of cosmetic items. But now there's so many out there, there's so many different options that I'm just not as interested as I used to be. So the challenges, absolutely, 100%. You're going to see me in drop shot when I need to be in drop shot. You're going to see me driving silly cars that you wouldn't expect all over the place, if that's what it takes. So yeah, I am glad that there are new motivations to try different things in the game, and who knows, maybe someone plays with Gizmo for the first time and falls in love and realizes that that's their main.
I would love that kind of a story. I'm just glad that they didn't make challenges that would really affect the way your teammates play, for example, if you solo queue. So I'm glad that it didn't do score backwards goals or whatever. So I think it's just like score with a topper, score with a car, or do saves, goals, whatever in certain game modes. So I think they were very aware of what would happen and what I was scared of, that people just go into games and try to fulfill the challenges.
And then when you had 2 points for touching the ball, you just encourage people to touch the ball more, right?
Oh yeah, you make a point there. That's true. But I've not really noticed more ball chasing than usual.
Yeah, I think people just gravitate towards that naturally.
Yeah, that's totally right. All right, thank you so much for this podcast video. I hope to see you again next week to discuss maybe the second week of League Play.
Sounds good to me.
Cool, thank you very much, and I hope you have a beautiful rest of the day.
Thank you, you too.
Bye-bye.